Massachusetts Institute of Technology is dropping a requirement that prospective hires make a diversity statement, becoming the first elite university to throw away this practice. Previously, MIT required applicants to write, quote, a statement in regards to their views on diversity, inclusion, and belonging, including past and current contributions, as well as their vision and plans for the future in these areas. MIT President Sally Kornbluth defended this decision, telling Rising in a statement, quote, my goals are to tap into the full scope of human talent to bring the very best to MIT and to make sure they thrive once here. We can build an inclusive environment in many ways, but compelled statements impinge on freedom of expression and they don't work. Responding to her comments, former Republican presidential candidate and talk show host Larry Elder took to X to write, quote, duh, one need not go to MIT to figure this out. So this has been a top goal of people on the right seeking higher education reform, and also various civil liberties groups, including the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, that these policies should be considered compelled speech, like, you know, attesting to having a certain political view before being hired, and they should be gotten rid of. So I am glad to see MIT being the first to take this step, and I hope that other colleges follow suit.
I don't know that I think it's attesting to a certain, it's compelled speech anymore so than asking a prospective employee to write out where they think they should be 5 years from now, or what kind of work product they hope to have developed 5 years from now, or say anything prospective about the future. A private institution is allowed to value diversity, whether it's racial diversity, diversity of thought, or any other kind of thing, and ask its prospective employees to talk about how they hope to help further MIT in that goal. That being said, I think the key point here is that these things don't work, and that most people don't think of themselves and their role as a cog in an institution as having any real meaningful role in facilitating those kind of HR priorities, like what the workplace composition more broadly looks like. So there are many instances in the world where new ideas come, they try them, they don't work, and they cast them aside. And I think it's good for a private institution to be able to do exactly that, instead of what we're seeing all across the country, where the police, the FBI, the intelligence agencies are embedding themselves in these institutions. Congress members are threatening to withdraw federal funding from institutions that don't fall in line or with specifically their views on Israel, and are coming very close to, frankly, with their redefinition of what anti-Semitism is, criminalizing criticisms of a foreign country in the first place. This is all fair game. Private institution making its own rules about how it wants to administer itself. I don't see the problem.
Right. Well, and just like those things, I don't think I don't support criminalizing speech or any of the things you're talking about. I did a whole radar last week about how I thought the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act is very bad. So similarly, if the professors were, forced to say something, if as a part of the hiring, I mean, again, a private institution can do whatever it wants, but as part of the hiring practices of the institution, if it had a policy that you must have a view of Israel or Palestine in either direction in order to have this, in order to be hired into this position, I think we would all say that that's silly and they shouldn't have that.
Well, not quite. I mean, there are plenty of social justice, there are kind of justice-minded institutions that very much ask the people who work there to have a worldview. You're not going to be a tenant advocacy lawyer thinking that landlords are great and you should kick people out of their homes. You're not going to be, work
what if
at
you're a math professor.
Well, that's different, but
right.
You made a very broad statement, and I'm pushing back against it because I think it was overly broad. There are many, many workplaces that are ideological in nature and that require you to have a certain worldview, or else you won't be able to do the job. And so if MIT is coming to terms with what it thinks qualify and don't qualify in that regard with respect to whatever their specific research goals are or whatever institutional goals there are, I think that's fair, and that's part of the growing process. It is interesting that there is such an obsession among some of these conservatives about what's going on at Ivy League campuses. You see it not just in this instance, they're never going to have the same attention to what's going on at a state college, the kinds of colleges where most Americans are educated. As they do these Ivy League institutions, and we see it all, again, with the focus on the protest. There have been, 150 schools that have been engaged, and there's absolutely no attention being paid to some of the state schools, even though, as what we're seeing in New York, CUNY students have been hit with felonies, where Ivy League students have been hit with misdemeanors. Folks who are concerned about the working class shouldn't just be hand-wringing at Columbia. They should put their money where their mouth is and focus on how poor or lower income students more working class students are being treated in this scenario. And I'd say the same thing of MIT. But if Larry Elder, wants to weigh in, if this is where people's political attentions lie when there's so much going on in the country, domestically and internationally, then God bless. I'm glad that he is
people can care
buoyed by this outcome.
People can care about multiple things. They can want the education system, particularly the
Ivy League
taxpayer-funded, publicly supported part of the education system, including the state schools.
Public schools, state schools are
right.
actually fully tax-funded, or are largely substantially tax-funded.
Right, and organizations like the Foundation for
MIT
Individual Rights
are not.
Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, write about all the free speech abuses there, including the one suffered by pro-Palestinian protesters, and similarly have been warning about DEI statements and other examples of compelled speech, and trying to keep the policies consistent with the First Amendment. So, I also read that speaking of policies being changed at universities, there are some institutions now bringing back standardized tests again. There was a big push to get rid of the ACT and the SAT for admissions on grounds that ostensibly that would be a good thing for fairness, or for being able to have better consideration of people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Of course, many people have pushed back on that, including some people from the left. I know Freddie DeBoer has written about this a lot, that getting rid of standardized tests doesn't actually enhance equality, because if you're looking at a lot of the other criteria that go into what they could look at instead, ends up advantaging the privileged even more than standardized tests do, and so it was a very self-defeating move.
Yeah, it's a problem when so many kids are advantaged first and foremost by being legacy students. I think Harvard's class is about 40% legacy. Moreover, those same legacy students and other affluent people who go to these schools benefit from the fact that they've had violin lessons all their lives. They can point to international travel and living abroad.
The water polo
a lot of things that are very costly to provide to your kids, speaking another language, all of those sorts of things. And for especially recent immigrants who might not have had the same opportunities, might not speak English as a first language in the home, all of these other kinds of things, being able to test very well can be a way to break through when all of those other factors are against you. Not to mention people who pay other folks to write their essays for them. I mean, it's a real racket. So I certainly applaud the effort to try to make it seem less stacked against poor and working class students who see the opportunities, the really tangible material opportunities that going to college at all, but especially elite institution, can provide to you, and making it easier for them to do so. Those barriers still exist, and I'd be really curious to know what the conservative kind of response is to making it easier for poor and working class people to get into college, to go to college, and to be able to afford to pay for college.
We'll have more Rising right after this.